Rivers. And for those of you who do not know who I am, I'm Julie Fox, and I'm the Master of the Worshipful Company of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators. Just to provide you with a little background, the Tutt Rivers Lecture is held annually in the City of London by the Worshipful Company of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators, and carries the name of two of our most distinguished members of the profession. Peter Rivers was president of the Institute, and he made a very, very generous provision for an annual lecture series, which was initiated by the Institute in 1972. I'm delighted to say that the lecture continued under the auspices of the Institute for over 20 years, and we now have the privilege as the company of running it. Sylvia Tutt was master of the company in 1983-84 and had the privilege to serve as the master of the first woman master of a city livery company, appropriately enough in the same year as Dame Mary Donaldson became the first woman to serve as Lord Mayor of the City of London. She certainly blazed a trail for women in the livery and will be warmly remembered by those of you who had the privilege to have known her for her unique contribution to the development of the company in the past, and her commitment and foresight as a generous benefactor to its future. This was reflected in the decision by the court, I'm delighted to say, to rename this annual event as the Tutt Rivers Lecture. This evening, it is my delight to welcome Rebecca George as our guest speaker. And you will have seen from the information that we shared with you that she has had a most fabulous career history to date, and I'm sure will continue to be a prominent person across the city and the world. The common thread for Rebecca has been not only management consultancy, but IT. And she is, as I'm sure a number of you will be aware, a member of the Worshipful Company of Information Technologists. Rebecca is passionate about education, and currently she is chair of the Skills Reform Board. And this evening, I'm delighted to say she will be addressing us on what I think, and I know, will be the most significant change in the sector for over 40 years, responding quite correctly to the needs of employers. Before I hand over to Rebecca, may I just confirm that this evening's lecture will be videoed, just to request that you please keep your microphones on silent for the duration of the lecture. And Rebecca has very kindly agreed to take questions. So if you have any questions, please can I ask you to put them in chat, and we will be managing those and asking you to deliver them at the end of Rebecca's presentation. It now only remains for me to hand over to Rebecca.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me to speak to you tonight. It's been a while in the planning, and it's good to be here. I just want to thank Julie for your very kind introduction and reiterate, please do ask questions. I'm not that keen on really long talking heads on Zoom meetings, so I'm planning to speak for around about 20 minutes. And then if you can ask any questions you like, either about what I talk about or anything else that you think might be of interest to us all. So as you've heard, I've been the independent chair of the Skills Reform Board for the Department of Education for nearly a year. And in that time, I've served under 5 Secretaries of State for Education, 1 for just 36 hours. I was considering offering a prize for anyone who can name all of them. But as even I had to double check one of them, I thought that was slightly unfair. For completeness, they are Gavin Williamson, Naheem Zawadi, Michelle Donnellan, James Cleverly, and now Kit Malthouse. Fortunately, though there may have been change at the top, the skills reform agenda is well underway and continues to have support from stakeholders and politicians. As you will know, the Skills for Jobs white paper, which set the direction of travel, was published in January 2021, and the legislation to deliver it was passed in April 2022. So these reforms cover further education, higher education, and lifelong learning. And the overall aims of the reform are to give people the skills they need to get good jobs and boost productivity, to provide increased flexible and accessible provision to lifelong learning, put employers, as Julie said earlier, at the heart of the process, building on the success of apprenticeships, increase the prestige and quality of technical education for the 50% of the population who do not go to university, and simplify adult funding for providers, giving them more control and flexibility, and focusing accountability on outcomes rather than the number of people that actually attend courses. So I'm going to say a little bit about the context now. The further education sector has for many years been overlooked and undervalued compared to schools and higher education. It has suffered from underfunding, potentially for decades, and learner numbers have been falling for a variety of reasons, including some courses have been cut, there's much increased complexity in the funding rules, ongoing increased competition from universities, and what this has led to is an increase in skill gaps in some critical areas, particularly more technical ones, and right now manufacturing, warehousing and distribution, amongst others, and I'll come back to this theme later. Now, you will understand that it takes a while to collect numbers about education, which is a source of some frustration to me because I'm used to having just-in-time and excellent data all the time. But if a course is 3 years long, it's kind of, you have to wait 3 years to know whether the person who started it has actually finished the course. So the latest numbers I've got, just to give you an idea of the sorts of numbers of people we're talking about, are for 2018-19. 2.9 million people attended further education, and approximately 2 million of those took courses lower than level 3. Level 3 is an A-level standard, with nearly 1 million taking maths and English. And this is one of the big challenges that we have, that people are leaving school. Too many people are leaving school without necessary qualifications in maths and English. So 2.9 in further education and 2.3 in higher education. And of that 2.3 million, around 1 in 5 do not get what the department calls a positive return. Well, what that means is that they're not getting the kind of salary that you would expect a graduate to get. And typically, and remember when the numbers came, but I don't think there's been a massive amount of change. These are through people taking degrees in agriculture, physical sciences like geography, and the creative arts. It's also worth mentioning that the number of adult learners in England, and I am talking about England in this lecture, although Scotland has its own programme going, but the number of adult learners fell from 3.2 million in 2010 to 1.6 million in 2020, which is a decrease of 48%. And this says that adults are not taking up learning opportunities. If you add to that the fact that we have a poor record in the UK for investment through employers in education and training, you know, you can see the skill gap is gradually getting worse. It's currently predicted that by 2030, 7 million workers could be underskilled for their jobs, particularly in digital skills, and this constitutes about 20% of the labour market. Add to that in the UK, 30% of jobs are forecast to be automatable by the mid-2030s. 47% of jobs may be automated for those educated to level 2 and below. Level 2 is between GCSE and A-level. So we've got some real challenges. We're underfunded. We haven't been doing well. Adults are not continuing their lifelong learning. We have skill gaps in critical areas, and we have a lot of people doing jobs which are likely to be automated. The impact of COVID and withdrawing from the European Union has created further impetus to increase skills and boost employment, as I'm sure you're well aware. The white paper set out plans to increase employer involvement with skills courses and better tailoring provision to local needs, improving the qualifications available, introducing a lifelong learning entitlement, reforming funding and accountability, and supporting further education teachers. And it is worth noting that white papers matter. The white paper sets out the intentions of the government. There's then a consultation period which firms up those intentions, and then legislation is passed. So I and my team do look back at the skills white paper often, because that's actually the promise that's been made about what's going to happen. And that's also an interesting debate as we have a succession of new ministers, all of whom are very, very committed to skills and skills reform, but some of them do have some ideas, amazingly, about where they'd like to place their bets. However, the Skills and Post-16 Education Act was passed in 2022, April, to implement the strategy that was set out in the white paper. Skills for the green economy are prioritised to create a workforce for jobs now and in the future. And schools will be required to make sure all children get to meet people that provide a range of technical education routes, such as apprenticeships, T-levels, or traineeships, inspiring them to a greater and broader range of careers. It will be easier for people to get the skills they need to get well-paid jobs in industries with skill gaps, such as health and social care, engineering, digital, clean energy, and manufacturing. Employers and colleges will work together in local areas to identify the skills needed in communities. And you may have questions about how that's going to happen. We should come back to that. Priority sectors have been identified. Now, priority sectors are the ones where we have the biggest skill gaps today, and we urgently need to fill them. And so that you won't be surprised to hear construction, health and social care, manufacturing, haulage and logistics, digital and technology. But in addition to that, we have identified growth sectors. And by the way, when I say we here, I mean the government. This is not a Department for Education thing. This is a cross-government strategy. And the growth sectors are digital and technology, green and net zero, life sciences, and the creative industries. And interestingly, the government has gone further and tried and started to identify regions of the country where those growth sectors may be focused, because what we don't really want is our cities competing with each other for the same market. And we also need to build specialist skills as far as possible around the country as part of the levelling up process. So what have we done so far? So far, apprenticeships are probably our best and flagship programme. This year, we've had nearly 300,000 apprentices start, and many of them are in really, really high quality apprenticeships with high quality employers. However, the achievements are down, and the achievements are down because we don't have very many unemployed people in this country at the moment. 3.4%, it's the lowest it's been for 50 years. And apprentices, even when they haven't finished their apprenticeship, are highly desirable. So apprentices are being lured off their apprenticeships and into jobs before they get the chance to finish. And that's something that we need to address. I am a particular fan of T-levels. T-levels are new, and you may not know what they are, but they are a technical qualification that is equivalent to an A-level. It's a 2-year course, and 1,000 people completed the first cohort of T-levels this year. They're all technical. There are going to be 24 eventually. They're going to be rolled out over the next few years. And of particular pleasure to me was the fact that of the T-levels, of the people that completed the course this year and passed, 94% had an industry placement. And this is no mean feat, given that, you know, this was right through COVID, and a lot of them were doing digital T-level, and most of the employers had moved to home working, and the Secretary of State at the time emphatically did not want anybody doing their industrial placement from home. So it's a real testament to the providers that delivered the first T-levels that they did so well. A couple of other things to mention: boot camps. Boot camps are a free and flexible short course up to 16 weeks for people aged 19 and over who are looking to grow their skills or change sectors. And there's a guaranteed job interview at the end of the course. There were just over 2,000 participants completing a skills boot camp between September of 2020 and March 2021, so that's a 6-month period. And half of those reported an outcome including new employment or new roles or responsibilities or opportunities. Quite a few of these were in haulage. We also have announced the first wave of institutes of technology. So 12 institutes of technology have been established. And these are made up of more than 40 further education providers, around 60 leading employers and 18 universities. And basically the way an Institute of Technology works is it's a local collaboration between employers and providers to provide really high quality technical education, very, very, very much involving employers. And then a key part of the skills reform are the local skills improvement plans. I said I was going to come back to the role of employers. Part of the point of this reform is to create people with the sorts of skills that businesses need, and ideally the sorts of people that can be productive more or less from day one and not have to go into a lot more additional training once they've joined their employer. So local skills improvement plans are led by employer representative bodies who tend to be organisations like chambers of commerce, but not only chambers of commerce. And they will be working very closely with providers and key stakeholders to develop evidence-based, credible, actionable plans which responds to local need and local difference. Because of course, you know, what Middlesbrough needs is very different from what Cornwall needs. But part of the challenge here is making sure that we deliver people with the skills that are needed in 2, 3, 4, 6, 10 years time, and not just think about the skills gaps of today. And then there's a whole variety of other things that come under this reform agenda. There's a review of higher technical qualifications, career services. You heard me saying earlier that people at school are going to have the opportunity to meet people who offer a range of opportunities. That doesn't really happen today. Career services are a bit lumpy, a bit different in different parts of the country and also in different parts of the system. So there's a lot of work being set up around career services. The further education workforce has a lot of development plans in place, and then the funding and accountability is another important strand. And there's lots more, but I can come back to that in the Q&A if you want, because I thought I'd finish by talking about what I've learned in my first year. So 18 months ago, I was a managing partner at Deloitte, running a business across 25 countries. And although I'd worked with the public sector for 20 years and loved it, I'd only actually worked in the public sector as a kind of employee on secondment once, and that was at the Cabinet Office. I have been passionate about improving the quality and diversity of people across the IT industry for more than 25 years, and I firmly believe that appropriate high quality qualifications, independent assessment and accreditation are important, especially for IT professionals. And that's why I've worked with the BCS, the Chartered Institute of IT, for so many years, including being president in 2020. I'm highly motivated by the skills reform agenda, bringing the public and private sectors closer together, working in a collaborative way and focusing on building skills, especially in science, IT, engineering and maths that we need for the future. Earlier this year, I started visiting colleges and talking to people around the country about the reform programme so I could understand better what's actually happening on the ground. So I'm going to talk a little bit about FE colleges because I have been blown away by every college that I have visited. And that includes further education, adult education and sixth form colleges. Without exception, the teams are highly experienced and passionate, dedicated to their learners, their local communities and their college. Many people work in the further education sector for most of their careers and are cheerful and optimistic in spite of funding pressures, and in some cases, buildings which have definitely seen better days, and increasing challenges around mental health and gender fluidity. Equally, I've been privileged to meet a number of SME employers. The vast majority of the employers in this country are SMEs, and 99%, and they employ around 12 million people. I've seen many examples of SME businesses working closely with their local FE college, running workshops, providing apprenticeships and T-level opportunities, and collaborating on a wide variety of projects, productions, manufacturing, art, hospitality, and engineering. Because I've only really ever worked for two organisations in my career, IBM and Deloitte, I had some assumptions. For example, that all employers offer the same high level of training and career development as the organisations I have been lucky enough to work for. And also that it's hard for SMEs to engage in education programmes because they don't have the spare resource. I was wrong on both counts. We do not compare well with other countries on employer investment in education and training. In the UK, employers spend about half of the European average on training their employees. And our large employers could do more. And SMEs, in spite of resource constraint, are active, supported, and inspirational. Of course, there's more to do. There always is. But there are many examples of excellent collaboration on which we can build going forward. And then the learners. For me, this is usually the best bit about going out and visiting. I love meeting the students. They're diverse, articulate, ambitious, and hardworking. It's been especially pleasing to meet women on car mechanic apprenticeships and people from all ethnic backgrounds and genders taking civil engineering, pharmacy, and health and care qualifications. They want to learn. They want to get good jobs. They often want to stay in their local communities. COVID was really tough on them, and we're still learning how tough it was. And they are glad to be back in the classroom and the infrastructure of learning. And last, but by no means least, civil servants. I have held civil servants in high regard for many years. The people I am working with in the Department of Education and its agencies are first class. They're focused on delivering outcomes, measuring success and delivery. They understand the whole system and the strategy, but they can also get into the detail of individual programmes and how they're challenged by the constantly changing context. They're engaged and fun and want to make a difference. And they understand that skills reform is a long-term activity. We aren't going to turn our Cinderella further education round quickly, but they know, and I agree, that in the long term, this reform will transform many lives. Thank you, and I hope somebody's got some questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Rebecca. And I think you have thrown the proverbial pebble into the pool and sent out a huge number of ripples, which I trust will provoke a number of questions. I can see one person, I can see Angela Squire, who is keen to ask a question. Angela, can I ask you to unmute yourself, please?
Yes, thank you, Master. Good evening, everyone. Rebecca, I was wondering if you could say a bit more about employers and colleges working together to achieve the outcomes that you were explaining.
Yes. Sorry, go on.
I'm so old that I can remember these things working really well many years ago. And it seems to me like the establishment threw the baby out with the bathwater.
So I think we did many things in the past really well. And some of those things we've forgotten how to do and have to relearn. But I also think there's new things going on. And I think that there's responsibility on both sides. There's responsibility on the side of the employers and the providers to understand more clearly and better the requirements that each other have. From an employment point of view, what we really need to do is create people with the high value, high quality skills that the growth sectors are going to need in the next decade. And, you know, my view, Angela, you may not agree with this, but my view is that employers actually aren't that good at knowing what skills they're going to need in the future. They're pretty good at telling you how many vacancies they've got today. And you sort of have to get that holistic view of everybody coming together around the table to talk about a local area in order to understand what's going to be needed for the future. So I do agree with you. And if I think back to, you know, the days of the 70s and 80s in the further education workforce, tech, polytechnics working with local employers, I think there's a really long tradition of that happening and working. But now it's much more, I think, it's much more interactive. So what I've seen, for example, a local SME sponsoring a photographic competition at one of the FE colleges, but you had to use a completely new medium. And so, you know, it's, and I've seen examples of AI companies or gaming companies coming in on weekends and doing workshops with students to work on a new app or, you know, a new video game. Okay. And that actually, that's what we need, because that really inspires the young people. I don't know whether that answers your question, but.
Oh, it does. And you just made me think that one of the issues that possibly doesn't help employers identify what their needs will be is because they are small businesses, small enterprises, and so many people have set them up with their own personal passion, and that they have a bit of a mindset that they want to find other people with that personal passion. But find it difficult to break into a system to find people to train.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, many of the FE colleges have something that they call universal skills or something similar to that. And that's about really trying to train people in the sorts of attitude, problem solving, you know, the communication skills that all employers need. How you get that particular fire around a single person company, that's very, very tricky.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I think, Perrin, you indicated you have a question, please. If you'd like to unmute yourself.
Wow, I didn't realize I'd done that. I did it inadvertently, but it's a pleasure to meet all of you. And I was just sort of writing down some notes, especially when Rebecca just said employers are not good at knowing what they need in the future, which I thought was really, insightful personally. There's lots of things going on in my head, so if you are happy to indulge me. So I was pleased that you mentioned information, advice and guidance in passing. And I was really pleased that you said it isn't quite right yet, more needs to be done. We've done some work with young people, and after all the things we've done in the country, and you all look like you're experienced with it, and we've got this online career service and local career services. Who do the young people go to for advice? Their families and parents. And you know, so it's important for us to know that, and that's what we discovered, and it's something that needs to be kind of taken into account. So, you know, that would be, for me, one thing that I can't see in the paper is something we're working on, which is very popular in government nowadays. Well, I don't know if it will be with the new Prime Minister. It's this co-production, getting the voice of the learner. And somebody just said it's so hard to get people to come. And from my work that I've done with further education and skills, if you go to the more challenged areas of the country, the starting point isn't, you know, the equivalent of 2 A levels. You're down to what Rebecca was saying about the disappointment of, you know, the lack of English and maths, and, you know, what kind of English and maths, you know, there's these fundamental debates underneath all this. Is it a GCSE? Should it be functional maths? There's all these questions that are going through in my head. So sorry that it's a bit of a ramble. They're all there. And I don't know if these are all resolved, but so there's an English and maths question, there's a co-production and the voice of learning question. And is it right that it's just employers? I mean, in these plans that you mentioned that have already been set up, how much involvement have local residents or potential learners have? Because in the most poorest areas that I've worked in, particularly in London, it's adults you meet who have no qualifications at all, and you've got to sort of build up their confidence, make sure they don't feel like failures, which is exactly the beautiful work you were describing for FE, and getting that to work for employers. Hope that makes sense.
It's all really good stuff, and I'm not going to address all of it, but I will make a couple of comments. And first of all, the information, advice, and guidance, role models, absolutely critical. Everywhere we go, we need more role models, and we need them more down at more younger ages in the education system. This is something I've learned many times talking about IT to girls in schools. And the intention is to have an awful lot more people going into schools at an earlier age to talk about the opportunities available to them going forward. Because if you don't know anyone who's got any kind of higher level qualification, if you don't know anyone who's an IT exec or whatever, then how can you possibly make that kind of choice? I say intention advisedly. We are at the beginning, really, of what I see as a 10-year program. Not all of this is going to happen at once. I do think it's critically important that we try and get some of the acceleration of activities in some of our most challenged areas. So, you know, we'll have to see how that goes going forward. Co-production and the voice of the learner. Interestingly, I'm chairing a skills board meeting tomorrow morning, and our first item is called A Day in the Life of, and it's a video made by one of our T-level learners to walk in her shoes. And I have asked that we can have the voice of the learner at every board meeting if possible, because that is the point. You know, if we're not getting it right for the voice of the learner, then we're not getting it right. I'm not going to go into the complexities and details of the government's new strategy around communications, because it's probably not going to last. But what I will say is we are very hopeful that we will have more end users of all kinds in all of our communications going forward. Is that you know, subtle enough? I have talked a little bit about basic skills and challenging areas. We do have a problem with attainment rates, particularly in our white population in certain parts of the country. And that's partly a societal issue, it's partly a role model issue, it's partly an opportunity issue. It's probably bigger than this programme, but it's really important that we all understand it and try to address it. And then it's not just about employers, you're right, it's about the people who live in a locality. And for me, some of those people, for the younger cohorts anyway, are the parents. So parents also need to understand what opportunities are available for their children and how to access them, and especially how to pay for them. So yes, you know, we know about the stuff that you've mentioned. I won't say it's all going to happen today, but we do know it's there, and it's in the plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. May I just ask one more thing I forgot to mention, is enterprise, because young people have this view, particularly young people, that, you know, tomorrow they can be an influencer or they can set up their own business, and they see all these new entrepreneurs and they think that's for me. And we know when we talk to people who are experienced that actually you need to kind of scaffold that thing. You don't just become a successful business person. So there's a whole enterprise strand, which I just think it'll be good to hear more about that as you develop your ideas and thoughts. I'll shut up.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think we need to bust the myths, don't we, about how easy it is to be a WAG or an influencer. And you know, some of those myths are being blown up as we go forward. But it's kind of difficult at the moment when we've got almost no unemployment. There's so many there are so many job opportunities available. And also it's kind of difficult when you see influencers out on the street doing their thing and it looks so fun, you know. But I think we'll get there. I'm hopeful that we'll get there.
Okay, may I ask the senior warden, who I think has a question?
If I can, there we go. That's got it. Well, thank you very much, Rebecca. I mean, I have a sort of slightly multi-part question, because I think it's really interesting, some of the things you're getting at, particularly in terms of how you work with the local collaboration, and then the institutes of technology you talked about, of which there didn't seem to be very many, given the size of the country. And my question really is around whether actually this requires a sort of a deeper change to the way in which we educate our children, because you talked about T levels, and T levels are equivalent to A levels, but actually should we be starting some of this technical training at 14 instead of 18, and actually running it through? And should we be talking to local firms around what are your needs, and then saying to the students, if you do these courses, these employers will guarantee you a job, and you go straight into them. I mean, I wonder whether that's a possibility, so that we actually start, you know, people can make decisions about careers and vocations and things they want to do a little bit earlier, so they can start that skills training that much earlier, because not everyone's into the academic life. You don't need to find your way. Actually, not everyone needs to get 10 O-levels or GCSEs as they now are. So, you know, it actually is a sort of technical training starting a bit earlier, a positive or good thing. And then the other point that springs to mind is you made a point right at the start around, you know, the 50% who don't go to university. But actually, the 50% who go to university, you mentioned a lot of them don't earn salaries equivalent to graduates. So actually, should they have gone to university in the first place? And actually, do we need to rethink our further education so that actually university is if you like, for cleverer people, well, not cleverer people, but you know, I mean, for a smaller group, but actually that we focus much more on vocational further education for that other group that does stay academic, if you like, up to 18. So why don't you comment on those?
Yes, thank you very much. Interesting set of challenges you've given me there. So should we start our technical training earlier? I think some of the GCSE syllabus subjects are trying to do that. And I also think that there are efforts in the education system to give pupils and learners practical skills that they can use in employment. So I'm not necessarily sure that technical skills are tricky, aren't they? Because they do change. But those kind of universal skills, understanding how finances work, budgets, putting projects together, solving problems, collecting evidence, analysing things, those are really, really useful skills for any employer. And I think that you'll find some of our GCSE syllabus subjects are beginning to bring in more of that. I don't think, however, I'm going to find any employers that will guarantee anybody a job. We can find people to guarantee a job interview, but you know, employers at the end of the day, they do have to choose their own people, and I think it's unlikely that you'll get employers to make those kinds of guarantees. We do have employers that guarantee numbers, so we have big leading employers around the country. And I'm thinking of employers like NatWest Bank and Amazon, who will say, we will have this many apprenticeships. My company, Deloitte, same. guaranteeing the number of opportunities available. But the jobs, you have to go through that job interview process. And then HE. So HE's for me is interesting. I went through the higher education system, got a degree here, and then went to America and did a Master of Science. And a lot of people who work in the Department for Education and in public sector and in the major employers of this country did that. But the fact of the matter is that, in my opinion, and this is my personal opinion, not government policy, but in my opinion, some of the higher education establishments have been nibbling away at some of the high margin stuff that further education colleges used to deliver, and they used to deliver it really well. And some of the higher education organisations are offering courses which are not resulting in good economic employment. And at the moment, not even very many contact hours. So I do think that it's important that higher education, further education is seen as a spectrum of reform, not as a separate component. And the way we talk about it, and I'm learning the language here, is we talk about having more opportunity to get to a level 4 or 5, which is a degree level, through further education or higher education, depending on what you want to learn and how technical that, the course is. But what we really want to do is inspire people to go to further education colleges and do really, really high quality qualifications, which will be level with the kind of qualification they get at a university. I don't know whether that helps. Maybe a start.
So reform is needed.
Reform is needed. Yes.
Okay, anybody else have some questions? Because there have been, as I say, a lot of number. Over to you, Ollie. Do you want to?
Hi, Rebecca.
So you need to switch off your sound. Yeah.
So you've talked about the learners, and that's really important, the employers, but what's the role of educators in this reform? What can they do differently? Is my first part of this question, both at the institutional level, but really importantly, we've not talked about the kind of capacity for trainers. So take construction as an example. There's enormous numbers of vacancies at the moment. Construction workers, very highly paid, way above what they would get in the further education markets. That's one of the biggest challenges for, as I understand it, educators, institutions to find those trainers.
Yeah, great question, and absolutely on the button. So we've got a real problem with further education capacity and further education workforce development. There's a big provision in the white paper and the bill for workforce development, and a lot of money is going in to workforce development and also to encourage people to come into the FE workforce at different times in their career, not necessarily full time. So, there are various employer-led programs, one of which was around maths, for example, where people who have retired, have taken retirement or at the end of their careers can go and help teach. We need that, but unfortunately, we also need a lot of young people who are in that creative arts industries, video gaming or AI or computing, who tend to be in their kind of late teens and early 20s. We also need them, which is why it's so good to see the collaborations I talked about earlier. So you might not get them into the classroom, but if you can get them running a workshop or a competition, it's nearly as good. The elephant in the room is pay. And this is a subject which I speak about a lot, because in the legislation and in the budget so far, there has not been a provision to increase FE pay, and there needs to be. There needs to be more money for people in further education. I actually think it will come. I think part of the challenge is that the Treasury wants evidence and evidence base around what the increase should be and what return there will be for that. And I don't think we've got granular enough yet in providing them with the information that they need. but we have to. We have to get there. Speaking that slightly off the record, that bit, but it's fine.
Okay, any more questions, please? I'm sure Rebecca has posed an awful lot of questions. Certainly, the comment you have just made about further education, having been employed in the sector myself, I can assure you that we had a huge number of very, very talented lecturers and people who were passionate, but we relied upon their passion because they were not in the job for the remuneration. One of the things that concerns me, and I think it takes some things that Angela was saying, is really making sure that people coming out of this process are day one ready. Because, as you say, employers aren't really that sure about exactly what they want from their new recruits. And I think if they are not clear, how are we going to translate that into ensuring that our education providers make sure they are actually day one ready?
Yeah, so you're never going to get everything right for day one, because there's always going to be things that new hires need to learn about how the organisation works and, you know, all its systems and processes and so on and so forth. But I think we can do a lot better. I think we can do a lot better. And it goes back to your point about starting earlier. I still don't quite understand why, in all of my years of learning, I was never taught anything about finance, not even what a bank account was. And, you know, really, we ought to be able to produce students who understand how to manage money, understand how to manage projects, whatever a project is. I mean, it's a multitude of different things, but a thing that starts, finishes and ends, and at the end there's something different from the beginning and you can measure and see that difference. And we do need to have people that know the importance of gathering evidence and what that evidence actually is. So in today's world, it's so easy, isn't it, to find the truth that you want to find from the source that you want to believe in. And our employees of the future, we need them to be able to test, to weigh up, to assess, to triangulate, to come into a situation, even if they've got a preconception, and everybody does, but be prepared to have that preconception overturned. So I don't think we'll ever be completely day one ready, but I honestly think we could do a lot better. Yeah,
we definitely can do better. I certainly agree. I certainly feel there are a lot of people who face the workplace and with trepidation rather than feeling prepared. I wonder if I could invite somebody who might like to ask the final question. I'll throw it open.
I'd quite like to just offer an opinion, if I may.
Charles, please do.
Thank you very much. It's been a really interesting talk, Rebecca, and the opinions have been fascinating. I'm wondering whether COVID has set back a lot of the confidence that young people have, because people I meet, particularly young graduates who perhaps graduated 2 or 3 years ago, and 1 or 2 people who are coming out now, don't have confidence. And I think it's because of the end of education that they received, and also the way they've been able to, well, really not benefit from university in the way that people did. And just people have been locked in their rooms, they've been locked away, they're very much taught to be very individual. And I think confidence and also the ability to talk to one another, I think those are 2 great skills that we really need to try and encourage. Thank you.
I couldn't agree more, Charles. I don't think that we yet have a really good understanding of the impact of COVID on anybody, actually, but particularly younger people, perhaps, you know, the sort of 16 to 28-year-olds. Everywhere I've gone, all of the further education colleges have said they've seen a huge uptick in the number of people with mental health challenges. And I know that that's also true at universities. And this is really tricky because oftentimes these people are adults and, you know, but they've been through an experience which is life-changing and is still impacting them going forward. I sat on the board of the City Mental Health Alliance for 3 years, and it was at a time when we were just beginning to properly talk about mental health challenges in the workplace, in the city. We've still got a huge distance to go, I think, for everyone. And I definitely think this agenda has been set back by COVID. I happen to think that there are some jobs, some activities which are better done in person, in a room and together. But I also happen to think there are some people that do better in a room, in person and together. And I think we all have to work on this going forward. And we, my generation, owe it to the generation coming through to help in any way we can.
Thank you very much indeed, Rebecca. May I now hand over to Steve Cant, Master of the Worshipful Company of Management Consultants.
Thank you, Julie. And it's my pleasure to express thanks on behalf of everybody here to Rebecca. I'm very aware that this event has taken some time to come to fruition, as you alluded to at the start. And I thank you, Rebecca, for your patience and fortitude in sticking with it over many months and giving us tonight's excellent lecture. Education, as you probably know, is one of our company's 3 main values. Indeed, we had our own education lecture back in June, which focused on the school curriculum. And similarly, productivity, which you mentioned, and I certainly heard the voice of a management consultant there. Productivity is often at the heart of any management consulting assignment, and it's been enlightening to hear how skills reform is aimed at providing the right skills in the right place at the right time to improve our country's economy. That's a lot easier said than done, as you've demonstrated today. Anyway, so it's been fascinating to hear about government plans for reform in this area, and I thank you for an engaging, thought-provoking and genuinely interesting lecture.
Thank you.
Thank you also to Master Julie for making it happen and for all those behind the scenes making the tech work. So I now ask all virtual participants to share our appreciation in the usual way. So mute off, everybody.
Thank you very much indeed. And all that remains for me to say is thank you all very much indeed for joining us. A huge thank you once again for Rebecca. And for those of you who are at home, it seems inappropriate for me to say, I wish you a safe journey home. But for those of you who are here in person, I do wish you a safe journey home and enjoy the rest of your evening. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.